Welcome to New Home Insights, the podcast from John Burns Research Consulting. I'm your host, Dean Worley. If you want to follow market trends, demographics, capital, new ideas, and endeavors that touch on housing, we're going to try to make sense of that every couple of weeks. Let's go. Welcome, everyone, to the New Home Insights podcast. I'm your host, Dean Worley. Let's get right to it today because we have a ton to cover, a lot of ground with Ryan Marshall, the CEO of PulteGroup. Pulte had over 31,000 closings in 2024, around 30,000 net sales, making you the third largest builder in the nation, which is pretty darn impressive. Ryan, how you doing today?
Yeah. Dean, glad to be here, and appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity. I think you have to know, given that we're on a John Burns podcast, I think you guys have to know the exact number of closings.
Okay. I do actually. I have, but I don't want to be like overly. I'll give you your exact gross margin later on. How's that?
Fair enough.
So let's start, Ryan. Actually, I want to go back a little bit. Let's talk about Ryan Marshall for a few minutes, but I want to go way, way back before you became CEO in 2016. I want to go back to I heard on another show that you grew up in kind of small town Utah, and I did not know this about you, but I think a lot of folks do know this, that you bought a gas station when you were in college. I absolutely want to hear about that.
Yeah, I'm sure the story gets retold and embellished each time. The fishing story gets a little bit better, but I did grow up in a small town. My dad was a veterinarian. It's a town. It's called Tooele. It's about 45 minutes from Salt Lake. It's turning into a bit of a housing growth market for the Salt Lake market. When I was there, it was a 2-stoplight, one high school town. My dad was the town veterinarian. We were there for most of my childhood. We had about a 3-year period where we really moved out into the rural land, and we ran a big beef. My dad ran a big beef cattle operation. So it was a great childhood, wonderful, wonderful parents, and I loved the place that I grew up. The gas station story is interesting. When I was in college, I managed a gas station for a company that, they owned about 25 stores, convenience stores, gas stations. And after I graduated from college and I started my career in public accounting, I grew fairly bored of public accounting. And I said, well, look, I learned how to manage a gas station when I was working for the Holiday Oil company. Okay. And why don't I just go out and do it myself? And so I did buy a gas station a few years after I got out of college. It was right off of Interstate 80, just west of Salt Lake, and some wonderful life experiences and good business experiences for sure.
I was going to ask about that. So is that something that was sort of formative? You learned like those little tricks, put the Slim Jims up at the front.
It was make the coffee and the popcorn in the morning, and figured out how to merchandise and prevent theft, and what happens when you're a little tight at the the end of the week and you got to make payroll. I mean, there's a lot of life lessons there for sure. I eventually sold the gas station in order to go back to graduate school. I went to Arizona State to get an MBA. And I think I got 2 versions of master's in business, one in owning that gas station and one maybe more formal in the classroom at Arizona State.
That's some good experience. So then you started at Pulte about a quarter century ago. I
did.
25 years ago. And I think you started in Tucson. So did you go straight from the MBA to working for Pulte, or was there...
I did. I joined Pulte in 2001 when I finished my graduate school work. And I started in the Phoenix office. A fun fact about my time at Pulte, I got the job offer, and shortly after I hadn't officially started, but shortly after I was watching CNBC and it was announced that Pulte was acquiring Del Webb. Yeah. Oh. And so for a moment in time, it went through my head. I'm like, I wonder if this has any impact on what my career at Pulte will be. And sure enough, it did. Yeah. My original job was in a regional office in the Phoenix, the Phoenix area or the Phoenix market, and that regional office covered the entire West Coast part of our business. And because of the Del Webb acquisition, Tucson went from a very small division for Pulte to something that was quite large. because Sun City Tucson was there.
Yeah.
So the division went from about 200 closings a year to over 700. And I shortly after joining the company, I moved to Tucson to work in the finance department of the Tucson division.
That incremental gain was entirely due to the Del Webb in the Tucson market?
It was, and it was in kind of the years in the early 2000s when a lot of the Sun Cities were producing somewhere between 300 and up to maybe as high as 700 homes a year. Yeah, it was there were definitely a high number of absorptions because of the Sun City brand.
I want to get back to that in a minute. We're going to talk about age qualified, and we're going to talk about your new Del Webb brand, which is not age qualified. We'll talk about that in just a second. But fast forward, you become CEO in September of 2016. You were pretty young for a CEO at the time, weren't you?
I
Yeah.
was 40, almost 42 years old, 41, almost 42.
22. And I don't know, did you feel any added pressure? Did you feel like you're a little bit more under a microscope at that time?
I don't know that I would necessarily describe it as added pressure, but there was plenty of pressure.
Normal.
I'm not sure it matters what age you get that job. I think there's a fair amount of pressure there. I felt like I was very well prepared. I had a ton of real world experiences in this business, and I had a lot of mentors and folks around me that, including my predecessor, that I think went out of their way to make sure that I was ready. You're never totally ready until you actually get the job and you realize kind of what it's all about. And there's some things that come with the CEO job that you really can't get experience in until you have the job.
Yeah.
So, that's where I think, you've got to rely on a little bit of instinct and draw on all the lessons and the experiences that you've had in prior roles.
And we'll talk a little bit too also about team building and how Pulte is just a super team oriented kind of company and company culture. But let's start like we teased just a second ago and talk about age qualified, but also about this new Explore brand via Del Webb. The Del Webb brand has been a huge part of Pulte for years. It's one of your, but it's been classic 55 plus, the leading brand in the age qualified sector for sure. Now you're going Del Webb Explore, not 55 plus. Tell us about that initiative.
Yeah, so we, as part of the reason that we've had such a strong partnership with John Burns, Dean, is our company really believes in demographics and the study of demographics and what that means for the long-term strategy of our company. Specific to the Del Webb brand, when Pulte acquired Del Webb in 2001. It was because of what that brand stood for and what that brand means inside of the age restricted, age qualified consumer group. As I think most know, Del Webb stands for lifestyle. It's as much and maybe more so about the lifestyle that is created and delivered inside of these communities than it is about the home itself. And as we've operated the Del Webb brand over the last 25 or so years, what we've worked to do is make it about 25% of our overall business. 40% of our business is entry level, first time buyer. 35% of our business is move up, family and move up buyers, and then the 25% being active adult. And we've really indexed our business in those percentages because that's how we see the overall housing market opportunity in the country. And as we've done some deeper work on the age restricted buyer, what we found is that there's a cohort of buyers that are over the age of 55. They definitely desire the lifestyle, but they don't love the idea of being restricted. They also want the flexibility of maybe having kids or grandkids potentially that can come into the community and have a little bit more freedom. And so the opportunity that we've seen is to say there's still a cohort of Del Webb buyers that want age restricted, and we can continue to offer that just like we always have. But there's also a cohort of buyers that are more open and maybe more willing to move into a Del Webb community and what the brand stands for if it's not age restricted. As a corollary, Dean, we have this brand in Florida called Devasta.
Mhm.
And Devasta was an acquisition that the company made in the late 90s. It's mostly age targeted. It's mostly just in South Florida. It has a lot of the Del Webb qualities, but it's never been age restricted. And we've had tremendous
Yeah.
success with that brand. I think the opportunity that we saw as a company was to say, we can take the national brand recognition and value of Del Webb and apply some of the age targeted lessons that we've learned in Devasta and use this as a growth opportunity for the company. So, we're very proud and excited about the launch of Del Webb Explorer.
I know, knowing you guys, maybe you use Devasta as maybe that inspiration, right? Hey, we might be onto something here, but I imagine then you did a tremendous amount of market research to make sure you're on the right track, and that this Del Webb Explorer would work in that audience, and that demand was there.
We're not shy about doing market research. So there was definitely a healthy amount of research and debate and
Yeah,
argument, so to speak, before
yeah,
we arrived at kind of the final concept. And the beauty and one of the things that I love about this company is we are so team centric and collaborative. That I think when we get inside of a room and we debate and we talk about some of these ideas, we always walk away with something that's better.
and I've done someone who's done a ton of age qualified market analyses. The one thing we always notice is that yes, it's 55 plus, but that 55 to 64 ish really was usually a relatively thin part of that buyer profile. So this Explorer hits that kind of market that for it's a lot of it's self image, right? Yes, 55 plus, but a lot of people 59, 60, they don't think of themselves as ready to live in an age restricted community. So is
I
that,
think, Dean, I think that's exactly right. And, we're squarely getting into the Gen X generation. I think John would tell us that Gen Xers officially start at 1969, I believe. So those buyers that were born in 1969, they are just now hitting the age of 55.
yeah.
I'm squarely in the middle of Gen Xers. I was born in 1974. And in my head, I still feel 25. So I could easily see myself being the buyer in a Del Webb Explorer
Yeah.
because I don't see myself, old enough or have the desire to necessarily be in an age restricted community. So, the nice thing is with the power of the Del Webb brand and what it stands for, we can offer both things now, and it's probably long overdue.
Did you, within those internal debates that you just mentioned, did you have a debate along the lines of, hey, we were worried about polluting the brand of Del Webb by calling this Del Webb Explorer?
You, I might make the allegation, Dean, that you were sitting in some of those rooms, or maybe the room was bugged or microphoned. But that was exactly the debate. Is we work so hard to protect what that Del Webb brand stands for,
Yeah.
and we didn't want to create confusion in the mind of a consumer that maybe hadn't done enough homework to
Yeah.
differentiate between the difference of an age restricted and an age targeted community.
Yeah.
And you get an age restricted buyer that shows up in an age targeted and they get confused.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think anytime you have one of these powerful, iconic brands that really stand for something, you have to be thoughtful about evolving the brand in a way that doesn't do damage to it and doesn't confuse the consumer. So, we've got a wonderful marketing team, and they've worked very hard on kind of the marketing and the promotion of the Del Webb Explorer,
Mhm.
so that we enhance as opposed to confuse.
Those demographics are going to have some overlap geographically, but will you be strategic, maybe careful to not have a Del Webb Explorer too close or too potentially competitive with a Del Webb traditional?
In a weird way, Dean, actually, we think close and
Hmm.
proximate enhance the opportunity.
Ah,
If we find a location that tests well with the demographic that's looking for a Del Webb community, then that location works, and you can offer both things, and the consumer can really choose the thing that's best for them or the concept that's best for them. And I think if you look at some of the other, the hotel companies, I think are arguably some of the best of this. They have different brands that stand for
Right.
different things. And you can, oftentimes you'll see their higher end luxury brand side by side with maybe more of their mainstream flagship brand, and both can do incredibly well. And in some cases, they even share infrastructure.
Mm.
In this case, we'll have totally separate and independent infrastructure, but I don't think it's a non-starter to have a Dell Web Explorer and a traditional Dell Web Age restricted in close proximity.
And of course, you're going to have the classic Pulte/Dell Web amenities. Like you said, it's going to be this Explorer will be this resort lifestyle, just not 55 plus. I saw one amenity was going to be an Explorer, would be pickleball. And I'm having a hard time wrapping my head that pickleball is no longer an older sport. It's huge with or growing with the younger folks.
Yeah, I think the early 20s, early to mid 20s cohort pickleball has become not only a great physical fitness activity, but I think it's become incredibly social.
Yeah.
Um, there's been a huge rise in indoor pickle social clubs, where there's a bar and there's food and you've got the competitive nature of pickleball, but there's also the social element as well, which is I think the magic. We have a Dell Web that we just grand opened in Cleveland, Ohio, and that location in Cleveland will have our first indoor pickleball courts, which we think is another evolution of what's a very fast growing sport.
Yeah, we're hiring right now, and I did some sort of final interviews, and this is for an entry level position. And one of the applicants, I don't know exactly, I can't ask him his age, but clearly in his 20s, his favorite sport, his favorite hobby was pickleball, and I was blown away. One more question on age qualified before we move on to more kind of consumers and markets is that do you ever get a little concerned that age qualified isn't hitting all of the price niches within age qualified? That is that because you're very resort. It's typically Dell Web as a move up product. Do you ever think about trying to get entry level, if that's the right word, age qualified folks?
Dean, it's a great question. We talk about affordability within the challenge of affordability in all of our brands, and certainly within Dell Web and Dell Web Explorer, we look at that as well. The way that we've looked to solve it is through denser product. So, whether it's a townhome type product, which doesn't necessarily play terribly well with an older cohort because you're dealing with stairs and things of that nature. But we've had a lot of success with quads, effectively single level living, but a 4 units in a building. We've had a lot of success with that in Florida. We've also been working with our architectural team on developing some cluster type product where you have 8 homes in a cluster that share some common driveway type space. So you can do some things that still provide privacy and the feeling of living single family,
Yeah.
but you can help address some of the affordability challenges by having denser product.
Yeah, I you see that a lot. You see that a lot where you have the active adult communities within a given market tend to concentrate in that more affluent cash buyer or huge equity kind of buyer, and sometimes the other folks, they're looking for something for their price niche. Let's move on to markets, consumers. You guys have recently expanded your markets into Salt Lake, Portland, and Denver, I think. So you're still looking for new markets, and do you plan on doing that growth like in this case? That growth being mostly organic, is that kind of the main strategy for Pulte?
When we think about our growth opportunity, and growth is a very important part of who we are as a company, and in fact, we've laid out kind of long-term growth targets of 5 to 10% annually. Some years will be a little higher than that, some years a little lower than that. This past year, 2024, we were at the high end of that growth target at right around 9%. where we delivered about 31,000 homes. We've put a guide out for the investment community for 2025, Dean, to be essentially flat
Okay.
year over year. We think that there are some unique challenges in 2025 that will have us be flat year over year. But we've invested from a land investment standpoint. The investment that we've been making over the last 5 years has put us in a position where we're very confident in laying out that long-term growth guide of 5 to 10%. Part of that is organic growth in markets that we're already in, getting bigger in cities, taking market share, growing the divisions in existing divisions. And then part of that is going into new markets. As we looked at the top 50 housing markets, we identified a handful that we weren't an active player in. Denver, Salt Lake City, Portland were three of those.
Yeah.
And so we looked at a couple of avenues to get into those markets. One was through M&A, and the other was organic. In the case of those three markets, we elected to go organic in all three cases. And we've leveraged nearby high functioning, high performing division leadership teams to help us start those divisions. And then we transition from using that nearby team that's already a Pulte employee to growing a standalone team in all those markets. So we've done that in Denver. We're in the process of still having that happen in Salt Lake and Portland, but all three of those divisions have got land pipelines. They've got open and active communities in all three places, and we're very excited about the prospects there. So more to come, but three markets that we're very excited about.
So more to come. Have you, in looking at your analyses, you're looking at demographics, all those indicators. Are there places that you would not go? You don't have to name names. Just does it rhyme with North Dakota or Dakota? Without naming names, are there places like, you know what? No, we're not going to consider that.
Yeah, I without naming names, we believe that we need to have a reasonable amount of job growth and population growth in order to support a division. So, as we look at demographics, that's the first place we go, is to say, is this a market that's adding jobs, and therefore homes will follow? And do we think there's a substantial enough volume that we can justify the infrastructure that we know makes us special and unique? As a standalone division, we think it needs to have about 500 homes. There are some locations that can't necessarily support 500 homes from us, but they're close enough to another division that they can be run as a satellite market. So there's a few exceptions to that. But, in the case of a Denver, a Salt Lake, a Portland, we believe those are markets where we can have at a minimum 500 homes in those locations.
What is the single most important? You have to pick one metric you're looking at for a market. Is it jobs?
Jobs.
Jobs. Okay.
Jobs with a close, and there's a few markets that I think are maybe different, and that's your destination markets. Naples, Florida. That's a good example of a place that's got real appeal, and there is a non-permanent segment of the population that wants to be there seasonally.
Yeah.
And Naples is an example, or Southwest Florida, Sarasota South, where there's not necessarily a ton of job growth or population growth, but there's a lot of people that want to be there seasonally.
You are an all niche builder. As you mentioned ago, about 40% or so of your sales are in the entry-level niche. That's been migrating upward over the last several years. Has that been conscious decision?
It was a decision that we made about a decade ago, Dean. I felt like, in working with my team, we really felt like we were under indexed to what the opportunity was in the first-time buyer space. At that point in time, it was about 30% of our business. And we said, we want it to be about 40. And so we intentionally reoriented some of our land acquisition goals to be closer to that. If you take a market like Atlanta, that's got all price points represented in a very robust, big housing market. Our business in Atlanta is almost that identical mix of 40% first time, 35% move up, and 25% active adult. If you go to a place like Southwest Florida, the orientation there might be 85% age restricted, age targeted, just because that's what that buyer looks like. So when you mix it all together throughout the entire country, we arrive at that optimal mix that we've set for the company that I mentioned earlier.
Could Explorer, since it's going to be a primarily move up buyer, could that shift your proportions a little bit over time?
I don't think it'll be big enough to shift our proportions, and we would lump it into that kind of 25% mix that we want to be age targeted, age restricted.
Okay. Oh, I see. I know affordability is a big issue to you. It's a big issue to everyone. It sounds like affordability was a big reason that you shifted to more entry level. Just tell me, is affordability maybe your biggest concern right now?
For the overall housing market, I think it's the biggest concern for the country.
Yeah.
Citizens, residents of the United States are spending more of their income, on housing, no matter whether they're a renter or an owner. And so I think it's a crisis that our country needs to solve. We need to figure out a way to bring more housing supply into the market. Arguably we're somewhere between 3 and 4 million homes short of what we actually need. And that is probably the single biggest reason that we've got unprecedented affordability challenges in the U.S. housing market.
Are you guys feeling any, I don't know, I don't want to sound like a bummer, but a little bit of heightened anxiousness? We're recording this, by the way, in early mid-March. Are you feeling that a little bit, maybe the last month or so, some buyer anxiousness and uncertainty? Like, it was the first couple of months before the election, there was a lot of uncertainty, and that fed buyer anxiousness. It seemed to get better. There was some more certainty. It seems a little bit, in a lot of the markets I'm in anyway, that's back a little bit in this last maybe month or so.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're keeping an eye on, Dean. We had a very good fourth quarter of 24, and in our year-end earnings call that we had the first week of February, we talked about the results that we had in January, and that we were anxiously looking forward to the spring selling season, which is always an important time. But the comment, that I made was we were seeing some green shoots, that we were optimistic about the things that we were seeing in January. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on inside the United States. There's a lot going on in the world. I think all of us are keeping a very close eye on that and the impact that ultimately has on the consumer. We know that consumer confidence is a very big driver of whether or not, someone feels confident enough to make a decision to buy and or build a new home. And so whether it's things in the equity markets, things in national politics, or in geopolitical politics, wars and things of that nature, those are all things that I think can rattle and undermine consumer confidence, which, does definitely have an impact on buying decisions that consumers ultimately make.
All new home builders have benefited tremendously against resales by using incentives, especially buy down incentives. Do you see folks using that, indefinitely as a key incentive?
It's definitely the most powerful tool, most powerful incentive that we have right now.
Yeah.
It comes at a cost. And so I think as you look at the percentage of sales price that is being given to the buyer in the form of a discount, the levels are elevated. In the case of our company, the most recent quarter that we just had, it's running right around 7% of average sales prices going into incentives. And the majority of that is going toward financing related incentives. We have our own mortgage bank, Pulte Financial Services, and specifically Pulte Mortgage does a wonderful job going into the secondary market, and they can buy larger tranches of capital in a very efficient way that we can, and then in turn, offer to the consumer, in certain communities and for certain homes that will bring the interest rate down, as much as 150 or 200 basis points lower than whatever the headline rate is. And that's not a gimmick rate. That's on a 30-year
Yeah.
fixed rate mortgage. So, if you're a buyer that is affordability challenged, or you're just having a hard time wrapping your head around, a 7% interest rate, we've got, tools that can help not only the perception, but also, the real dollars and cents of what it means to a monthly payment.
And knock on wood, but it does seem like it's trending a little bit downward this last week or so. In fact, Freddie Mac, they've come down a little bit, I think 4 or 5 weeks in a row, and it's 6, 7-ish or so nationwide about now. That's, it's better than 7 plus just not that long ago.
Yeah, and I historically, even 7 plus is a great rate.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem that great when it wasn't, but about 24 or 30 months ago,
Yeah.
rates were in the threes.
Yeah.
So all depends on your perspective. But ultimately, I think where the rubber hits the road is interest rate is just one component of the affordability equation. The price of the home and then the wage earning capacity of the buyer are the other two legs of that three-legged stool. And, we've just got to make sure that those things are in balance.
Another way that you can bring affordability in a sense, at least, or at least can control cost to some extent, is through packages and through maybe not having the almost semi-custom kind of environment for buyers. Or I think you're moving in that direction with respect to floor plans, and you're testing the heck out of floor plans to get to the floor plans that work best.
There's a couple of things there that I'd highlight. We use packages quite a bit, especially in the first time buyer segment.
Yeah.
There you can offer less choice and make the process easier. And I think for that buyer that is a first time buyer, they want easy. So we can offer curated packages that have been reviewed by our interior design team. And we can, offer those at a more cost-effective approach because it's more streamlined, it's more efficient for us and our vendors. So we use that a lot in the first-time buyer segments. When we get into the move-up and the active adult, we still find that buyer, they want to go into the design center, they want to personalize the home in a way that works for them. So the beauty of our operating platform and the fact that we do play in all three segments, we've got the operational expertise to execute in both ways.
I imagine you're going to be very careful with especially your active adult sector in terms of trying to constrain what they want. I mean, those guys know exactly what they want and they need it.
And we want to give it to them, Dean. We have built a few more spec homes in all brands than what we did just a few years ago, partly because to use the very powerful mortgage buy down tool, you need a home that's going to close, the next 60 to 75 days. It's difficult to do that as a to be built. So we definitely like to have some spec inventory for that buyer that's really looking for a lower interest rate.
Builders typically, I mean, these days it does seem like, especially the publics, are much more comfortable with a little bit more inventory than they used to be. Is that fair?
We're running a little higher than what we used to run at. We've targeted our spec inventory percentage to be right around 40% of our total inventory. In a kind of perfect world, we like to have somewhere around 1.5 finished spec homes in every community. Not that you can have half of the home, but if you take the total finished inventory and divide that by the number of active communities, we like to be right around 1.5.
Like 3.2 kids per household. In the abstract,
that's right. Same thing.
That sounds terrifying.
And 3/4 of a dog.
On the Willie Walker show, which you're great on, you talked about something I hadn't heard of, that you would actually mock up whole floor plans in a warehouse and take potential buyers through that to get their feelings and then iteratively do it again.
We have brilliant architects on our team that do really good work. When you allow them in their creative way to come up with floor plans, and then we'll go into a large warehouse and we'll build the house, life scale house, We'll do it out of sticks and kind of paper and have furniture. And then you can take a customer through it and you can get their immediate feedback. You can change the floor plan overnight and then do it again the next day. And so the iteration process of tapping into how consumers are feeling that matches up, or in some cases doesn't match up with how they live, and you can react to it, you end up with a product that's consumer inspired. It's definitely a strength that I think we have as a company.
Yeah, because we've walked, I mean, thousands and thousands of lots, and you do sometimes say, "Oh, here's a pinch point in the kitchen that is difficult to navigate." That won't happen when you
and once you've built the home, it's kind of hard to change. You're kind of stuck. And, as fast as we build homes, it takes, several months to do it. So, what we've tried to do is be more cost effective and more time efficient in getting that feedback before you go build the home for real.
Do you ever see yourself using technology like VR or something like that to do that?
We do a lot of VR and we get great results out of it. So when we first started, this goes back over a decade ago. When we first started this, the VR wasn't quite as good. Mm-hmm. We only did this process as I described in a warehouse. Today, we do some processes like this in the warehouse. We do a lot of it through VR, and it's using some of the really sophisticated video game technology that exists. I still, it's a little bit like taking notes on paper and pencil old school versus using a device. There are proponents of both, but we've definitely continued to use both things.
I get nauseous, so I can't do that. I'm one of those, I don't know, the Horizon or something like that. I was told what it was, but I know I can't do it. They also can't animate whiskers on dogs and cats very well, apparently. So that's a problem. Let's move over to internal, running the business. You famously have, as I alluded to up front, this team first mentality. You, for the fourth year in a row, you're the Fortune Top 100 company to work for. Is that something you're conscious about that, and or is that that's your philosophy? And if those awards come, they come.
We're a people first culture, employee first, team centric culture, Dean, and it's been part of the DNA of this organization long before I was here. With my team, I think we've doubled down on it, and we've made it an even more intentional part of our strategy for success. We have a set of core values and things that we live by. The consumer is definitely important, but the most important part of our story is our employees. And we subscribe to the philosophy that if our employees are engaged, happy, and thriving, they'll bring their best selves to work, which in turn is going to create an unbelievable experience for the customer. So it is very intentional. We do it because it's what we genuinely believe. And some of the awards and the acknowledgments that we've had, I think, have followed. But that's not been the primary driver or goal.
Is your philosophy to be sort of, hey, let's figure out what we want to do and then have everyone on the team pulling the oars in the same direction? Or do you make room for contrarians, folks, so you kind of avoid groupthink? Do you try to sort of balance that?
The power that we have inside of our organization is to genuinely engage every member of our team, and so we encourage healthy debate. It's got to be respectful debate, though, and we want every idea to be put out on the table. And you push and you pull and you iterate and you try things. You experiment. We're willing to innovate. We're willing to fail. And by, truly using the power of team. So we talk about having a team first mentality. That's how we behave. And that's where those ideas come from. I often talk about, our culture, because it is a team first mentality. We only work with, nice folks.
Yeah.
So we don't hire, folks or team members that don't subscribe to that philosophy. Occasionally we make mistakes, and the organization holds itself accountable and quickly kind of says, hey, we maybe had a miss here. Maybe this isn't the best fit. Yeah. And we try and move in a different direction.
Do you use the PALS system? I'm just curious because we have that internally. We use the PALS, PALS acronym, Personal
I've not
goal.
heard of that one.
Oh, one of them is likable. So we're the same. We're kind of the same, which I love. I would not work in a place where people were sort of hyper internally competitive and that kind of nature. I'm always glad to hear when you say things like that.
We're definitely competitive, but we're competitive against
That's
kind of
what
the outside world, and we
exactly.
want to succeed as a team.
Yeah.
There's just not room inside the organization for internal kind of sniping and
Yeah.
backbiting. It's just not who we are as an organization.
That's what I meant. The internal competition can be just non-collegial. And I think it's a net negative over time, at least. I think you're famous as a company for having some of the best margins. In fact, I believe last year, 28.9%, Ryan, was your gross margin for the year. You wanted an exact stat. I can go to another decimal if you want. Actually, I can't. That's all I want.
You delivered. So
I
thank you. That is the right number.
So you're famous for that kind of margin. Is return on investment? That's your internal metric that you're just really hyper focused on that as your guidepost?
We did some work about 15 years ago where we really studied what creates value inside of home building. And the conclusion that we came to was that return on invested capital is the value creator, value driver. And so quite literally everything that we do is looked at through the lens of, will this create healthy return on investment?
Yeah.
So whether it's our pricing strategy, the way we design homes, the way we content homes, all of those things are, when it relates to business economics, we think about the return that it's going to create for the enterprise. And look, that filters into our enterprise culture and people strategy as well. And we don't skimp. We actually, when we talk about return on invested capital, it's not just about cutting costs.
Yeah.
It's about spending the right money in the right place in a way that you create value. And we think that we've done that. And one of the byproducts and one of the things that comes out of that is higher gross margins.
Yeah.
But often we are asked by investors, what are your gross margins going to be on future projects? And while that's important, it's not what we underwrite to. We underwrite to return on invested capital. And for a business like this that is so capital intensive and long cycled, we really believe that's what creates value.
But do you feel that tension between selling a lot of homes because you're a big builder, you're the third biggest builder in the country, and maintaining those margins? Because those things often can be at odds with one another.
They can be at odds, and the beauty of having return be your north star.
Yeah.
You can get there by having more price and less pace. You can also get there with less price and more pace. So you have choices, and by setting our philosophy around making the decisions that will yield the optimal outcome, we give our team members and our division presidents the autonomy and the flexibility to use the tools in the toolbox to arrive at the best answer. And it's part of, this is, I don't want to give all of our secrets away, but it's one of the things that I think also is a big driver of the culture that we have, is we have a lot of autonomy and flexibility to allow our employees to be their best selves.
So you're balancing, they're balancing. You just kind of keep an eye on all those levers, and it's worked so far. So it's hard to argue with.
It's part of, if you think about this business, it's a dynamic business that's ever changing. And part of what makes it fun is that no 2 days are ever the same, and no two challenges are ever the same. And so I don't think that we should put ourselves in, artificial constraints about the tools that we use to solve the dynamic markets that we're facing.
Hot take time. Ryan Marshall, hot take time. Just your first blush kind of reaction to a couple of quick hit things, and then we'll wrap it up. One is labor cost. Are you concerned about labor costs escalating here with tariffs and potential immigration and things like that? Is that something you're tracking?
We're definitely watching it and paying attention to it. We require all of the trade partners and the labor that are on our job site. We require everybody to be, here legally with the right to work. So it's something that philosophically we believe in as a company. I think when we think about overall labor in the United States, not just in home building, we're probably a little tight, and so simple supply demand economics would say if there's less, in this case, labor, that'll definitely have an impact on what the overall cost of labor is. And certainly that will be, an ultimate input cost into the labor component of the homes that we build. So we're paying attention to it.
You mentioned supply just now. I was going to ask that next, actually, we are the housing supply, as you said, we're grossly undersupplied in terms of housing, especially for folks where price points where folks can afford. Can the federal government do anything about that? Or is that such a local issue that's beyond the levers of a federal activity?
Land entitlement and planning has always been at the local level in the United States. And I think it's one of the things that makes our country unique and special the way that it is. But it's also contributed to the dynamic that we're in today, which is most municipalities have adopted a philosophy that the residential housing can be the neighboring city's problem to solve. So most politicians and municipalities want to create jobs, job growth, growing economy, healthy economy. Those are all positive things. But sometimes we forget about the housing supply element that goes with those jobs. The adage that I like to use is a home is where a job sleeps at night. So when we think about creating a new job, by definition, a new job requires a new person. And we need to think about where that new person that's moving into the said municipality or city, where they're going to sleep at night. And so, my plea and ask would be whether it's local, state, or federal government that we have a broader view as we grow the economy, we create jobs, that we're creating enough homes to go with it. That means that we need to be paying attention to the aging infrastructure that we have in the United States: sewer, water, the electrical grid, schools, roads, some of those things. As we grow the population and we grow the number of homes we have in response to a growing economy, we've got to make investments in those things as well.
And it is something the federal government absolutely could do, is could expand the infrastructure to set the platform for that development. But honestly, do you see that happening? Is that's going to mean a lot of dollars spent?
I think I think where we could spend a little bit more time focused is there are a lot of dollars that come from the federal and the state level that ultimately make their way down into local municipalities. And I think there could be a requirement. Maybe it's more carrot than it is stick to say, if you're going to take advantage of these dollars that flow from the federal government into state and local municipalities, you've got a requirement to make sure that the housing demands in your municipality are appropriately balanced.
I'm in California, where the state has been doing exactly that. A little bit more stick, actually, than carrot, to make a lot of municipalities expand what they do. And it's worked to a certain degree, but obviously not, there's still a lot of supply.
Yeah, Dean, there's examples of both carrots and sticks. Yeah. The good news is there's more conversation going on right now about the need for more housing supply than I've ever heard in the 24 years that I've been in this industry. So no easy answers, but a lot of smart talented leaders that are working to solve it. And look, I believe in our country. I believe that it's the greatest country in the world, and I think we can solve it, but it's not going to be easy.
I want to end on a bummer. We've talked about anxiousness and things like that. Let me get your take. Last question is just the fundamentals for home buying are still pretty positive, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. The equity markets haven't necessarily reflected that same sentiment, but it's a very positive operating environment. We had a great year from sales and closing standpoint in 2024, and we're optimistic about 2025 as well. So, um, there are some challenges and
Yeah.
potential headwinds out there, which I think we've talked about,
Yeah.
but by and large, I think it's a great operating environment.
I agree. I think that the anxiousness, I feel like, is if just nothing happens, no one say anything for a little while, I think some of that anxiousness would dissipate and we feel a little more stable, which I'm hopeful happens. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been tremendous. I'd say this 100 times, but I swear to God, I mean it. I always learn a lot. I love doing this. I love doing the research and before we start this, I love hearing about, especially stories about the early days from some of you folks. Those are always entertaining.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is Dean Worley for the New Home Insights podcast. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.